What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Artful Chiropractor podcast. My name is Ray Daniels, and I am your host. And this week, I am excited and stoked to bring to you this guest. I have had this person on the list of people that I've wanted to have a conversation with for a long time, and it's finally worked out. And I'm bringing to you none other than Dr. Monique Andrews. She is a neuroscientist, she is a chiropractor, she is a philosopher, and she is a woman with a huge heart and who is dedicated to giving back to this profession and the students and every single person that she serves. A little bit more about her. She has been sharing her knowledge and wisdom with the chiropractors for nearly 2 decades. Her dedication to the philosophy, art, and science was recognized the moment she entered the profession. Upon graduation from Palmer College in Davenport, she was awarded a presidential citation for service to the chiropractic profession, which is absolutely an inspiring story. And she was the only student to ever receive the honor. Holding both a doctorate of chiropractic and master's degrees in neuroscience, the breadth and depth of her knowledge is vast. Dr. Mo is best known for her engaging presentations and TED style of lecturing, making even the most difficult concepts in neurology and physiology accessible to all learners. She has such a skill to get everybody in the class engaged. She's drawing pictures, she's calling people out, holding people accountable, making them and inspiring them to be the best versions of themselves, always holding true the fact that who we are as people precedes who we are as chiropractors, something that she has drilled into us and something that I'm so grateful for. Dr. Mo is definitely brilliant, but perhaps her greatest gift is the enormity of her heart. She absolutely loves what she does. She is so compassionate. She's so authentic and real, and that's why so many people are drawn to her, want to hear her speak, want to connect with her, and she is just shining the light for all of us to actualize our truest potential and grow into the docs and the people that we were meant to be. So with that, I hope you all enjoy this interview so much, and please welcome to the podcast, Dr. Monique Andrews, better known as Dr. Mo. Dr. Mo, welcome to the Artful Chiropractor podcast.
Thank you, Raymond.
I'm really excited to have you on. You've been on my mind as a guest for quite a while, and as we were just talking in the pre-chat, it's just getting to that point of self-empowerment, I would say, or just doing that work to where I feel that I'm ready almost to like have this type of conversation with you, and that's nothing to do with you, like you said, that's everything to do with me. So I think our listeners are going to love this conversation, and it's about time we had it.
Oh, thanks, Ray. I really appreciate your intention and your effort and your commitment. And, one of my favorite quotes is Goethe, and it says, "At the moment of commitment, the universe conspires to assist you." And I think as we feel ready, to come up to our challenges, if we accept and realize that, then I think everything really does fall into place.
Yes.
Yep.
I was thinking back to I think it was must have been my second quarter when I had your CNS class, and there was like such a feeling of like excitement, a little nervous, a little scared, but like I walked in your class and I'm like, holy cow, the amount that she cares about what she's doing right now like inspired me so much, and you set the standard so high with what I wanted out of my professors, right? It's just like you loved what you did every single day. Granted, you're teaching neurology, which is your passion.
Yep.
But you also took it to the point where it's like every single day you have a chance to like impact students and the trajectory, and like you own that, and you still own that. So I just want to really acknowledge you for that. Thanks.
That's really why I'm here, is the ability to, shape and create new leaders in chiropractic. And I think something that happens in my class, aside from my level of passion, which, as you said, is obvious, is this idea that I want students to go beyond my level. And I think when you call people to that, they have a choice. And every day, every single day, there's a choice, right? You commit or you don't. And I think it feels a lot better as a student and as a human being when you commit to a really high level of performance. And mostly when you don't make that commitment, when you don't make that choice every day, I think you often just end up beating yourself up, right? And that sucks.
Yes, it does. I'm curious, Dr. Mo, obviously there's so many events throughout your life and people that have influenced you, but I'm curious of a few maybe events or people that like really inspired you along your journey to get you to this place of excellence where you're at right now.
So when I was in chiropractic school, I had a mentor there who there was a real call to a higher level of being with him. And actually there was an incident that happened with me when I was in chiropractic school. And I always tell this story in terms of doing something that wasn't in integrity. And I ended up getting away with it, except my mentor knew the truth. And I had a real come to Jesus moment with him. And I decided in that moment that never again was I going to withdraw from my integrity bank. Because it was probably one of the worst feelings of my life. And that was a real transition time for me. That was a profound experience that created a major shift in my life. And when you make a commitment to always be in integrity, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's really simple. Because you always have a choice. And every time there is a crossroads, you decide. That's not always easy to fulfill.
Right.
But it's possible. And since that moment, it's always been my choice. That's created a lot of difficulty sometimes. But at the end of the day, I can always look in the mirror and love what I see and be happy with who I am as a person. And I think that's everything. I think if you can look in the mirror at the end of the day and love yourself, I don't know what else there is.
I love that.
Yeah.
So from that moment, what was that process like of staying in integrity? I mean, that's such a profound shift. And I'm just thinking, a lot of our listeners, they may not have had that one moment that like stopped them dead in their tracks of like, you get to make a decision now going forward every single day to not withdraw from that integrity bank. But I think this is so crucial. And we've had that conversation before when I was getting ready to give a speech on integrity. And that stuck with me so much. And it's crazy the amount of opportunities daily that you have a chance to pull from that integrity bank. So it's just like, is there a process that our listeners can do like right now?
Yeah. Pattern interruption is a good process. The old elastic band on the wrist. And I can't tell you, I think at least once or twice a week I'm sitting with students and they're struggling and I have a drawer full of elastic bands. And literally it's like BJ said, it's slipping and checking, right? Are you going to be perfect all the time in the beginning? No. And the way you can do that is through pattern interruption. And that literally could be an elastic band on your wrist when every time you have a thought that's incongruent with your, being your highest self, you snap the elastic band. And the way I think about it is really about your story, right? So all day, every day, we're walking along and there's this narrative running. Some of it's our monkey brain chatter that just goes. But some of it is really profound conversation that we're continually having with ourselves, right?
Right.
So the stories that we tell ourselves, the script that we use to narrate our day really determines everything. Here's the powerful piece with that. You control your story, right? So if it takes a little pattern interrupt for you to interrupt the story that you're telling and start a new story, that's it. Physiologically, your brain doesn't know the difference between what's really happening inside you and what you're telling it. And in fact, what you tell it becomes your reality. That's the power of our narrative. And it's your narrative. So whatever your story is, that's going to guide your reality. This is not new stuff I'm making up, right? We all just steal concepts from everybody else. Yeah. Neuro-linguistic programming, Tony Robbins. This is, positive thinking, Napoleon Hill. All that stuff's been around a really long time. But if we can take command of our running narrative, well, then every single moment is a choice.
Right. And it seems like you have to have constant moments throughout your day that you can check in with your narrative, or at least it doesn't have to maybe every day, but it's like you would need to like make sure.
Yeah, no, it has to be every day, many times a day. You got to check in with your story,
right?
Because we easily fall into like old narratives, right? We have a narrative from when we're 5 that we're not good at whatever X. We don't have any friends, and so suddenly. And Gabor Mate talks about this a lot in his book, When the Body Says No, which is a fantastic book, that these patterns that we create in childhood become dysfunctional as adults. So maybe kicking and screaming as a 4-year-old when you don't get your way is productive as a response, as a coping mechanism. But we tend to drag these same coping mechanisms into adulthood. And then it's no longer productive to kick and scream when you don't get your way, right? But we see it happen all the time. So you have to be conscious. Meditation really helps with that. Yeah. At least once or twice a day, maybe more if you can commit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's so powerful for chiropractors or anybody in a healing profession. It's like you have to be on top of your stuff constantly. Because you're integrating and working with people, with all sorts of things going on.
Yep. If you're stuck, if you're feeling broken, then your vibrational energy is going to be lower. You're going to have less energy, period, and you're not going to be able to give everything that's possible to the people on your table for sure. And, that just doesn't feel good.
Right. What does that process look like for you now compared to when you first started, like, on this path of, like, self-reflection and, like, paying attention to your narrative?
So I still have to pay attention to my narrative, for sure, because sometimes, the bad stuff creeps in. And it's slipping and checking, right? There's not a day where I don't have some thought that I think, well, that's not productive. And sometimes it might take me 5 minutes of being really pissed off about something to realize, dude, what are you doing? That's just a story. You just created this whole story around this thing that's not even real. And I keep coming back to that, where it's like, it's not real. It's just whatever story you're making up. It's just your made-up story.
Right.
About everything, And I think maybe one of the most important things I realized, and probably not till I was about 40, which, Carl Jung says, life doesn't really begin till about 40. Up until then, you're just practicing, is that nothing that anybody else thinks, says, or does has anything to do with you. That's their story. It's just their story. And that's really hard sometimes if somebody's like in your face or in your space and you feel your physiology respond, is to just go back to, oh, that's nice. And the easiest way for me to get to that space is to talk to my inner child and just support that coping mechanism that's rising up because I'm feeling something, right? And oftentimes when we have that physiological response, we want to create a story about it because it's like, oh, I feel something. You feel hunger and you go, oh, I'm hungry. Or you feel angry. And so then we have to make up a story about why. I'm hungry because I didn't eat since this morning. I'm angry because this person did X. It's just a story.
Right.
It's just a story.
In those moments, do you have a process in that moment? Or is it kind of like afterwards, like checking in with like how you responded in that moment?
It depends how deep I fall into the hole. Like I said, right, if you really get like riled up for some reason, you might fall deep into the hole for like a day.
Right.
I generally, again, I typically meditate in the morning and in the evening, and I always check back in and reflect back.
Okay.
And that's a habit that we choose to do, right? People say, I don't have time to meditate. Well, no, actually, it's a choice. I don't care how busy you are, 5 minutes of just checking in. And a lot of times it's because people don't really understand what meditation is, right? And it could be different things for different people. But yeah, no, that process for me happens daily for sure. And sometimes even in the moment.
Right.
In a challenging situation, or if I know I'm going into a challenging situation, I'll be like, okay, just remember, those words in your head is just a story. It's just a story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of meditation, that has been such a huge habit that I've developed over these last couple of years, and it's been so crucial, especially going through chiropractic school, but it's going to be like imperative. Like it gets me to a set point before I start my day that I need to get to. And then at the end of the day, I would say I'm getting to like 60, 70% of the time. I'm that evening reflection, which I think is very crucial before I start my next day.
Definitely.
And like you said, just like being silent. I've been trying to go on some hikes sometimes too, just like no technology. My urge of like putting something in my ear, I'm like, why can I not just do something in silence?
That's our culture.
Crazy.
It's our culture.
Yeah.
We're just bombarded all the time with input. And, you know, our nervous system is never not bombarded, right?
Right.
Constant feedback. But if we can move away from all the extraneous, then imagine the efficiency with which our nervous system can just function on its own without all this aberrant noise in the system. It's amazing, actually.
Right. Yeah, it's so rare that we even have that. Because I think about driving, I'm like, this has got to be a sympathetic input to my nervous system.
Especially in California, right?
Yeah. All right, Dr. Mo. So I would say you're a neuroscientist, you're a philosopher, you're a chiropractor, you're a teacher, just you're an amazing human being. But what I'm really drawn to is kind of moving this conversation into the science of chiropractic and the nervous system. Because I'm going to say that there definitely have been times where I have even heard chiropractors say it's just like, it just works, right? And that's just like a cop-out in a way that I'm like understanding now. Like you're saying that for whatever reason, but it's like, you're going to miss the boat on the people who want to know why. And there's two sides of that, because some people are like, there's no science behind it, and they just shove it out, right? And then there's chiropractors who are like, it just works. I see it under my hands every single day. Why do I need to dive into the science?
Yeah.
So I would love to kind of start there. And I guess my first question is, why have you become so passionate about the science throughout your career and at this point right now?
Yeah. So I've been studying neuroscience for about 30 years, and that's about 10 years longer than I've been a chiropractor. So neurology's always been a passion to me. And when I first became a chiropractor, you know, there was some scientific research around chiropractic, but it was pretty limited, and it was predominantly condition-based. Almost all condition-based, in fact. And even still, the greater preponderance of research in chiropractic is condition-based. But now, in the last 10 years, we've gotten some really great, like real hard science about the impact of subluxation and correcting vertebral subluxation and what that does to the function of our nervous system. Mm. So those people that say there aren't any science, I don't know, they must be living under a rock. They're not paying attention. There's a ton of science. And we still live in an age where science is king, right? And it's interesting because I honestly believe in that modern science has really massively exploded in the last 100 years. And I envision and I imagine that maybe that will wane, not in my lifetime. And I'm down for that because science is really a language that we used to speak, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes even just putting language to something takes away from what it truly is. And if you think about quantum physics, that's a classic example of that happening. As soon as you describe it, it loses some of its meaning.
Yeah.
The chiropractic science today is really exciting because we have hard bench science that's not condition-based. Because I don't believe chiropractic is a condition-based profession. I believe that its intention is really about providing an opportunity for there to be optimal expression of the nervous system. If we have optimal expression of the nervous system, we have optimal expression of life. The chiropractors that say it just works, it doesn't matter, I think that's a certain flavor that maybe comes from that special 80s generation where we sort of have an evangelical approach to chiropractic. And that's okay, and that maybe worked in that time. But now that we have such valid, randomly assigned, double-blind science, real hard science in chiropractic like we never had before, we have this opportunity. We also have an incredibly educated audience, right? Mm-hmm. Who does not have the internet? Everybody has the internet.
Right.
And people are educating themselves, and that's amazing. So, neglecting the science piece is kind of like neglecting any leg of the stool. Chiropractic is a philosophy, an art, and a science. Imagine if you just decided to neglect the art. And art for me is not just the art of the adjustment. Yeah. It's also the art of analysis with connection. There's many elements to that. Communication, all of the magic, all of the fun stuff, really.
Yeah.
So what if you just were really jonesing on the philosophy and the science and didn't bother with the art? How far do you think we would get?
Nowhere.
If you were the last, how many times I heard this question? If you were the last chiropractor, would chiropractic survive? Well, how many legs of the stool do you have? Because if I was the last chiropractor, I would want that chiropractor to have ownership of the philosophy, the art, and the science. Because if you don't, the stool's going to fall over.
Yep.
That's not a complicated argument.
Right. And people, like you said, I think there was an example that you gave last time we were talking of like, would you go to someone and all they said was like, it just works, right? It's just like, I thought about that. I'm like, no, if they couldn't explain to me what was going on, there's no way I would go see them.
Especially not this generation, especially not your generation.
Yeah.
You want to know, what is the purpose? Where do I belong? How does that fit in? How does it work? Yep. I think it maybe works for a few people. It's still working, and that really must be based on a charismatic sort of chiropractor that just sells you on, let's just make it happen, you know?
Yeah.
I think we're much more educated today.
Yeah.
As a Canadian, I had a much more educated population base where that I would never even try that.
Right.
It wouldn't work.
Yeah. And then just thinking about the referral base, right? If they come into your practice of a symptom or a condition and you don't explain the deeper physiology of their nervous system, even if you get them out of their pain, it's like they're going to continue to refer people who are in pain.
Yep.
But if you explain the bigger story, they're going to be like, actually, this whole nervous system thing, kind of important. I think you should go. I don't care. You don't have anything going on.
We spend a lot of time in our report of findings, anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes, actually, really depending on, the person and how much educating they needed. But they would walk away with a written report, because a lot of times you're not just convincing them. You're also convincing whoever else decides how they spend their money in the family or their partner or their family or whoever, but it gives them an opportunity. If you do a really good job explaining it, guess what? That gets translated, and pictures are worth 1,000 words, right? Research tells us that people only remember 7% of what you say. It blows your mind, right? You better draw them some pictures. Maybe if you have some graphs associated with instrumentation as well, that's a big bang for your buck. You walk away with an HRV reading, man, there's some money, right?
Yeah. I mean, we drew pictures every single day in your class.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. How do we get people to consolidate what it is that we're telling them about? And I say selling because, part of what we do is pitching an idea, as part of our education.
Yep.
And, it's critical because you want them to be able to walk away and at least be excited about it enough and understand it enough that they can tell others.
Yep.
Not that we got their headaches better, because that's a great side effect of chiropractic, that it reduces pain. Right. And physiologically we can explain that. Physiologically we can also explain why maybe we correct subluxation and you still have pain. Hey, how cool is that? I got the science behind why it still hurts, why we didn't correct, I'm using air quotes, the problem that you came in with, but you still want to come because you realize that we are enhancing the function of your nervous system in general, and that pain is just one small artifact from that dysfunction.
I like what you said, too, about you have to be able to keep it simple.
Yep.
And they have to get it in the nervous system, the sense of that, because if it's overwhelming, they're not going to be able to explain it to people. And you think about all the chiropractors now, our listeners, students, they're struggling with communicating what we do. So it's like, as a chiropractor, communicating that to the lay person, it's like you have to be so on point and simple that they can walk away and be like, actually, this is what
on
chiropractic
all the time.
is. Right.
Yeah. And part of that, I'd probably say half of that is learning how to read people, which only comes with time and age. I think you get better and better, but let's say you're a young chiropractor and you haven't been exposed to that many people and you don't have that massive skill yet. Well, what do you have to do? You have to have a number of different ways to explain same concepts. You got to have one for, the 8-year-old, which is really important. That's a question I ask in my patient education class all the time. And sometimes it really stumps a student, right?
Yeah.
So you want to be able to explain it to a child. You want to be able to explain it to somebody that maybe is not that educated. And then you want to be able to explain it to the medical doctor and the electrical engineer, because they're going to want the details, and they're going to be the ones with the greatest objections, right?
Yeah.
You got to be able to explain it on all levels. And eventually you'll get really good at reading people, and then it just becomes a dance, right? Yeah.
I was thinking about this morning that we have so much input as students, and once you become a doc, there's a lot more expressive, right? And I think our neurology, when you have that input and you can't like articulate it, you don't practice articulating, you don't know it.
Yeah.
And I just thought back, how often I had this amazing input, but I never took the time to go home and be like, okay, say it out loud, teach this person next to me or nobody there, do a video like no one's going to see, and just outwardly express it. What'd you learn?
Yeah.
And then but if you don't do that like neurological loop doesn't get solidified.
Yeah. Synaptogenesis, right? The more time you repeat these patterns, you develop this skill set and you enhance the neuroplasticity in the brain. What's really interesting is what happens if you do that and you are practicing, suddenly you don't have to think about the words coming into your mouth, right? They just come out, and it's elegant and eloquent, and it's everything that you want it to say without having to think a whole lot about it. And I think that should be the goal for every student. Imagine if we could graduate every student to the point where they could deal with any objection. Now, did I graduate like that? No. But at this point, 20 years out, I feel like I could answer any question, and without having to think a whole lot about it. And that's my goal for the students, right?
Right.
So we've really revamped, for example, Dr. Tyal is revamping the communications class here at Life West, and we've been reworking. Dr. Borrell has been doing the patient education class, and we do a lot of objections and a lot of, challenging students on how would you deal with that. And you can see it's terrifying. It's terrifying for them.
It is. But, especially when you have teachers like yourself who will call on you no matter what.
No matter what.
Everyone in the class is getting called on.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really fun, right? From challenge comes growth, but you don't get good until you practice.
Right.
And when I was in practice, I hated doing screenings and things like that, but you force yourself, because what it equates to is your ability to practice your art of communication.
So for docs who are just now getting into practice, or students who are right near the end, would you say build some strategies in place of starting to, if they haven't done it at this point, just like start to articulate these ideas and these objections and different things that can come up, versus letting it be the first time in practice? Because obviously there's so many things that are going to come up in practice that'll be the first time, but like, is there maybe some strategies that they can take home to start doing, daily?
Yeah, I would
weekly?
start with recording yourself, like taking your phone and recording, an ROF objections. I have a whole list of like 100 questions that are like objection style questions that I hand out in class that students have to be able to answer. And some of them are tough, and so practicing answering those cold and watching yourself fumble through it, I think must be a very powerful tool. And then trying to emulate others who are doing it, and maybe reaching out to them to work with people one-on-one or even in small groups and say, hey, let's work on this communication piece, because it really is fundamentally at the core of the art, I believe. You can be the best adjuster in the world. If you can't communicate,
right,
probably not going to have your own practice, because it'll be hard to get patients in the door, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And going back to what you said about, like, once it starts to come out without having to think about it, and then you can pay attention to all the
other
subtleties,
things.
right? How is this person picking up on this information? What's their state? What's their nervous system at right now?
Yeah.
Like,
then you're not running a script.
Yep.
You're reading the person. And I think that just comes with time and experience.
Yeah.
It has to. And so even more reason to start earlier, really doing that. And we do competency testings, and you'll just see the rote memorization.
Right.
There's no connection, right? The example I use, it's like you're going on a date, right? And this is for students learning how to do case history. You're going on a date, and you have a list of 20 questions you want answered. And you're so obsessed with getting your 20 questions answered is you don't get to know the person, right? you've missed the whole thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really real for me. I got part 4s next weekend.
Yeah.
A lot of case history stations. Yeah, that's really, really powerful. And like you said, the earlier you can get going on it, the better. But docs right now, it's just like creating groups, whatever that's like in your community, in your practice, like get going on it. And even like being able to hear information, like even for listeners right now, be able to like pause it and what are your takeaways so far?
Yep. Yes.
And I've tried that. I'm like,
sharing that kind of thing with other people, right? Instead of sitting in isolation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's crazy. I'll be listening to something for 30 minutes, and then it's like, pause. What are your takeaways? Teach what you just learned.
Yeah, and
like,
write that shit down. Like, we need to keep journals where, you know, like you maybe have a journal where you're working through personal stuff, and then you have a journal of professional. And I still have journals from when I was in school. I had my professional development journal and my personal development journal. And some of the stuff is still really meaningful to me today, the things that you write down. But, you know, going back to the idea that you only remember 7% of what people say. So if you're listening to a podcast like this, maybe, you know, oftentimes I listen to a podcast, I'm like, if I can take away one thing, and why is that? Well, maybe that's the 7% that fits inside my little brain. I don't know. But it's always something that I want to take away, right?
Right.
Yeah, write stuff down.
In your professional journal, was that all just chiropractic? I mean, I guess it expands the business and chiropractic and everything of just like takeaways.
I was a real driver in chiropractic school, and my wife and I had planned to open a practice together. So that was really all around everything from, you know, what our mission was for our practice. You know, we had business cards before we even graduated for our practice in another country. You know, it was really just planning around that, and then ideas from practice management and mentors and just putting it all together, even down to what colors, you know, what colors are we going to have in the office? What does that look like? Yeah, that was all about what does that business look like?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. So I kind of want to segue into the different theories of subluxation. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you gave a talk on this earlier this quarter, and it was really powerful to kind of go through each one. And yes, there's still theories, but it's almost like you were like taking each one and like the truth of each one and combining it a little bit. So
yeah, because I think they're all happening.
Yeah.
You know, the most prevalent theory has to do with mechanoreceptive disafferentation. So, you know, all of the sensory inputs that we get. So mechanoreceptors tell us about muscle stretch and sensation in the skin, right? So anything that's mechanically stimulated, eventually that sensation turns into a perception, right? Mm-hmm. And so the mechanoreceptive disafferentation theory basically is that when you're subluxated, the message gets jumbled. And if the message gets jumbled or jarbled going in, then you might integrate it, but you're integrating misinformation. So then your output is going to be erroneous too, in the simplest way, right?
Right.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Gotcha.
And that even, so that comes from like David Seidman's, Christopher Kent talked about disafferentation. This is really still dialed into, you know, research by Horvick and Murphy, because they talk about how we get that jarbled message in, and now they're looking at the neurophysiology in the brain, right? So what does that do to the neurophysiology? And so their work looks at, so if you're subluxated, the neurophysiological response is altered in a not a productive way. So then they adjust those vertebral subluxations, and you see an enhanced response in the brain, electrophysiologically. I mean, it's easy. It's pretty black and white, actually. You're subluxated, you get poor neurophysiological response. If you take people who were subluxated and then correct that, you get a great physiological response. Wow, all of a sudden, we definitively know that subluxations affect brain function. Not just, you know, there's this idea that, I remember even asking students this when I first started teaching here. It was like, so what do subluxations affect? And the answer was almost always, well, peripheral nerves. Wow, because all of the theories of subluxation, disafferentation theory, dentate ligament theory, tell us we're actually affecting central nervous system, which is a way cooler story than the pain in your neck or the sciatica, right? It's like, well, I can explain to you why you're having that, but here's the really big problem. And that is your brain's function is altered because of this.
Yeah.
That's way easier, I think, right? And it gets you away from the condition-based approach.
Yeah. And when I was looking into Heidi Horvick's stuff, it was like influencing the prefrontal cortex, but I wasn't able to like take away like how exactly it was doing it, but we knew for sure it was like influencing it. So I was just like, was it, but like you said, it's positively influencing the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, how do you explain exactly how it's disafferentation? So it's getting altered signals in, so
Yep.
altered signals out, and the prefrontal cortex is controlling everything. But it's like, yeah, I guess in the prefrontal cortex, how is that adjustment affecting?
So imagine like this, right? The brain's main role is integration. And it's kind of like a switchboard operator. So let's say somebody calls in and they say, I want to talk to Ray. Only because they're subluxated, the message comes in and it's, I want to talk to Raylene. The switchboard operator goes, okay, I need to find Raylene, and sends a message back out. And it doesn't get to Ray. It gets to somebody else. It's just like that. So if the switchboard operator, if the brain doesn't receive the right message, it can't possibly have the right output. And then it becomes a vicious cycle. So think about that in terms of subluxation. Your mechanoreceptors are working fine in the muscles in your spine, and they try to send a message into your brain, which has to go through your spinal cord, except that message gets distorted because there's a subluxation. It's not a foot on a hose, but any aberrant performance of the nerves could be histochemical, an inflammatory thing, maybe even a slight tension is going to garble the message going in. Well, you can't integrate the information and come up with a reasonable response if you get the wrong information coming in, right? The information out is not going to be correct. And so then what happens is you're sending a message back out to the muscles, and it's not the right message. So it actually perpetuates the subluxation. I mean, this is in the purest of linear terms, right?
Yeah,
Linear
I love
ideas.
I love it.
Is, if the structures holding your spine in place can't send an appropriate message, then the message coming back out to them is either going to perpetuate the dysfunction, but the likelihood that it's going to correct it on its own with misinformation coming in is virtually impossible.
That's where we come in.
That's the mechanoreceptive disafferentation model, which has now been validated with electrophysiological research by Havik. Guru has done some amazing work looking at metabolic dysfunction with subluxation and found and have sort of looked at like glucose metabolism in areas of the brain that are affected by subluxation that go beyond prefrontal cortex, right? So anterior cingulate gyrus, temporal cortex, even all the way back to the cerebellum. Yeah. Now we're getting into the juicy stuff, right?
Right.
Because the cerebellum is the bomb. And when you look at inputs to the cerebellum, it's actually like 40-to-1 mechanoreceptive input to output from the cerebellum. So we're sending all these messages in, right? And that cerebellum is now going to coordinate and talk to the other parts of the brain to create a response. And we used to think that cerebellum was just about motor function, balance, vestibular function. And so we really relegated it to unconscious, perfunctory things like balance. Now we know through more evolving science that the cerebellum is also involved in immune system function, processing of pain, other cognitive things, right? So we don't just see choppy motor patterns when there's dysfunction. We see choppy cognition. Hey, that can tie into so many other things, right?
Right.
That's cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So for doctors,
we're still only
listening-
talking about one theory.
Right.
By
That
the
was
way.
one theory. I was going to say we didn't. The cord distortion theory as well.
Yeah, the dentate ligament cord distortion theory. So I used to, I never read a lot about it until, honestly, quite recently. And I used to think, whatever. Because if you look at a dentate ligament in a cadaver, it's like a flimsy, it's not even a piece of elastic. They're easy to tear. Cadavers are not human beings, right? And so I've been doing a lot more research on dentate ligament, and the findings are really exciting because even work dating back into the 80s with Grostic and before, they actually show that when these ligaments, right? So in most of the spine, they are like on an angle, like you imagine tension on a bridge, tension lines in a bridge. Yeah. But when you get to the upper cervical region, those dentate ligaments are almost perfectly horizontal. And normally you will see that if you bend your head forward, the cord stretches, but there's a little bit of distortion with the ligaments. It actually pulls the cord lateral. And instead of being shaped more round, it shapes a bit like a football. When you bend your head back in extension, you get compression of the cord, but still slight distortion. Totally normal, and your nervous system can deal with that. What if you're subluxated? Massive distortion happens. And this is probably hard to talk about without visualizing, but, grab a picture of the cord and one that shows you not only the different tracks, but what levels are supplied. And if you look to the most lateral part, you'll see that we have spinocerebellar tract, right? Mm-hmm. And specifically on the most lateral extremes of the cord is pelvic, so sacral and lumbar innervation. Yep. This becomes really critical for a doc who is trying to explain, an upper cervical doc, for example, that's trying to explain why you can have an upper cervical subluxation and have pelvic dysfunction. What is with this leg length discrepancy business, right? And there's been a lot of controversy over that, but generally we find if you stick to either supine or prone leg checks, then you can have inter-examiner reliability. The reason why we have pelvic distortion, which is a better way to explain it than leg length discrepancy, just because of logistics, is because of distortion in the cord caused by tension on the dentate ligament. So the science shows that to be the case. You ask your average chiropractor what causes leg length discrepancy, I think they'll struggle to explain to you why. They'll say, it's the neurology. Okay, but what's the neurology? Yep. Suddenly you have a very simple explanation, right? Mm-hmm. You can show people that. Take their arm and pull the skin on either side. Okay, now move your arm in a funny position. Do you see how that distorts the feeling on your skin? Just like that in your spinal cord.
And once you can explain that, I think to the people that you're serving, it's just another layer of connection. Oh, why are you doing that? Oh, if you have a simple way of explaining it, that they get it, rather than just doing all this stuff and not really explaining what you're doing because you don't think they're going to understand it.
Yeah. I think science, it's easy for us to have conviction as the chiropractor because we know all this stuff. Yeah. Science allows us to educate in our patients in a way that they too have conviction that goes beyond emotion. Because if it just works and you get them hyped up, then emotionally they're excited. But if you can explain it in a way that they can understand and maybe explain to somebody else, suddenly you don't just have an emotional commitment, you have somebody that has conviction. And that's an asset. Because that, I believe, translates to a much higher number of referrals. Because then other people are excited by what they're telling them. And I think that's why the science is important.
Yeah. And even when they're explaining to people, within their life, they can handle maybe objections, on a little bit. It's just actually, no, this is what's happening with chiropractic. Yeah. It's just
imagine if they can draw a picture. It's very simple to draw a round circle with two lines and show them what happens. Models are great too. There's some great models on the market now for showing, and different apps. I had an iPad and I would show, all kinds of different things. A picture is worth 1,000 words because what do we know? They only remember 7% of what you say.
So you said you had an iPad and drew pictures.
Yep.
Any specific resources on iPads? Because I remember Dr. Max sharing some apps.
Yeah,
that you guys used.
she had. So there was this. This is a funny story, actually. There's an app that's used by neurosurgeons. Okay, and it used to be we got it when we were in Canada. It was expensive too, and you can no longer access it in the United States. I don't know why. And so probably I won't say what the app is because it's not even available here anymore. But it was a great resource for just showing people what happened to the neurology and the biomechanics when, there was a disc dysfunction or subluxation or what have you. I think there's certainly a market to create some incredible visuals for, a programming inclined chiropractor app developer for sure. The more tools we have. Wow, maybe I'm giving away a great idea.
Someone jump on it. Okay. And then in terms of building your practice like this, there's not too many chiropractors that are building their practice based off of neurology.
Yeah.
Do you agree? Or
well, I think there's more now. Functional neurologists are into that kind of thing, but that's maybe straying a little bit away from, our chiropractic model.
Yeah.
And again, I didn't just sell my practice from a neurological perspective. For me, it's always been a three-legged stool. Mm-hmm. And every conversation started with, your nervous system was the first organ system to develop in your body, and it controls everything. And that's why it's so critical that we remove any interference to that. And in chiropractic, we call that a subluxation. And you start with the basics, right?
Yeah.
So all the elements are critical.
Okay.
Yep.
Day by day conversations with the people that you served, would that be like, hello, so-and-so, you check in with them, and then it's like, do you just bring up a topic that you're going to talk about? Like,
yeah, this is a question I've been asked a lot.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different ways you do it. And I never use scripts. And I never was like, okay, well, for sure I would talk about subluxation on the first visit, and the ROF would have some pretty heavy components, which would include, you got to talk about subluxation. You need to talk about innate intelligence, and the body's a self-healing, self-regulating organism. I would talk about that the body heals itself, right? Give examples of, you eat bad sushi and you throw up. That actually is a really healthy response, right? Mm-hmm. And that if you get a cut, it's not a Band-Aid that heals you, it's the body that heals itself. So there's some key things I want them to know right away, okay? From there, I would have other ideas, but it wasn't planned. And I had this, in our model, you were a patient until such a time that you were committed to lifetime wellness care. Then you became a practice member. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't based on any financial systems or plans or anything. It was just in your level of education. Were you here to get a problem fixed? And most people come to a chiropractor because they got something, right? I got a neck pain, a back pain, whatever. There's not too many chiropractic practices where everybody's just walking in to get the lights turned on, right? You bring them there. But whenever you get new patients, there's a process of education. And so my rule was, you have to be on all the time. You don't start talking about Steph Curry last night in the Dubs. Anytime they're a patient, you are on 100%. You're educating all the time, every time. And you don't stray.
Give me an example maybe of visit 4. They come in and, all right, Dr. Mo, yeah,
visit 4, they come in, say, hey, I was feeling great after the 3rd visit, and then I started having pain again the next day. Well, I'm going to go right back in and explain to them why that's the case, and just bring them right back to understanding that pain piece is only one small part. This is actually what we're working on, and, we're really anticipating that we're going to see changes with that pain. We're going to keep monitoring that. That's going to be one of our focuses, but again, taking them back to what is the main purpose. And the more you repeat, what are you doing? You're enhancing their synaptogenesis back into the place of why am I here? Why am I here? Why am I here? I'm here to get my nervous system checked. Mm-hmm. And so you just constantly keep bringing it back to that until suddenly they are saying it to you. You got to know that they get it. And we can get lazy, right? And start developing relationships with our patients and become their friends. And I personally don't think we should be friends with our practice members. I think it may sometimes compromise the relationship. And, after somebody's been in your practice for a year, 18 months, then your relationship evolves for sure. And maybe you don't have to be as prescriptive in your daily dialogue, but you're always checking. I think you always need to check yourself.
Yeah.
But
we think about how long it took us to get to this point of our understanding. It's a journey.
But I talked a lot more in the beginning, early on in a patient's, gestation into practice memberhood than I did later on. I could, and I would prefer not to talk a lot. But in the beginning, I think we have a job to educate, not just for the person on the table, but for all the people that they come into contact with.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And then so maybe when they come in and be like, Doc, I'm actually feeling really well. That's still another opportunity for you to go into the nervous system.
Hey, that's the ideal, right? And in my practice, I had a bugle. And every time somebody came in, and let's say they got checked and they weren't subluxated, I would blow the bugle in celebration, right? Hey, your body is healing itself. Did that mean that they never needed to come and get checked? Absolutely not. And there's a ton of analogies you can use, right, to say why you need to keep coming back, even though one time you didn't have a subluxation. Going to the gym, eating healthy food. I tend to stay away from dentistry as analogies because actually some people don't go to a dentist, or they go twice a year. Okay, I'll see you in 6 months. No, we need to check you a little more frequently.
Right.
But I never took a cookie cutter approach to that. I think, it really depended. I had really individualized chiropractic care for people. So, if we could check them every 3 weeks, they could go every 3 weeks without getting subluxated, then probably I'd make sure we check them every third week, not every week or every second week, but it was very specific to the individual based on what they needed to keep their nervous system clear, not anything else.
That's what I really appreciated, because I think so many docs, it's just they have such a starting point. They don't really know why they want to see people 3 times a week for 4 weeks, 2 times a week. It's like, I need to start somewhere.
Yeah.
But it's like when you personalize it to someone, it's like you will have a starting point for most of your people, but it's like you're constantly checking in. You're not just telling them this is what it's going to be like, because you have no idea how their system's going to respond. Yep. So it needs to be a constant check-in, right?
I think when you first graduate, there is a piece of that, well, I got to decide on something, right? And when I was in school, a lot of the practice management companies were around. We're like, okay, you see them 3 times a week for 8 weeks, then twice a week for 8 weeks, then what? And wow, okay, everybody's the same? Yeah. And so that never really worked for me. But I can tell you that when almost every patient that I started with, not without exception because some were different, but I would see most people twice a week initially until I started to see some shift in their nervous system. It wasn't prescriptive, but I would often say to them, we're going to need to see you. In fact, what I would say is you're going to need to see me, because that tells them what they need, not what I need. You're going to need to see me at least twice a week, probably for the first month or 2, until we start to see some positive changes in your nervous system, that your nervous system is responding and adapting in a productive way. I can't prescribe that. It's really going to depend on how your body responds. Yeah. But I can tell you from my education and my research that I need to see you at least twice a week initially to really get your body moving in that positive direction. For some people, that's 3 times a week, Yeah. But you got to pick something when you start. That's the toughest part. Like, what am I basing this on? Well, let's say, from a scientific perspective, at least twice a week is probably going to be most beneficial. Maybe it's 3 times a week for you. I don't care. I'm not giving a prescription for that.
Right. Dr. Mo, going back to the resources, I think for docs who want to, and students listening, who want to dive back into the neurology, what are your best resources to all right, I want to be able to explain this so well that it's like I can connect with my people that I'm serving?
Yeah. So some of the, I like reading research articles myself because I think, and this is even like studying anything. Let's say you're studying for a test. Well, if you only study the things like the bare minimum for a particular subject, then that limits your understanding, right? If you go beyond your level of comprehension maybe and just take it one step further to get all of the details, suddenly you own that information on a much deeper level, right? So going back and reading all the Havik research, like actually the articles, it's not that hard to figure out, So you start to read an article and you're like, what the heck is a somatosensory evoked potential? Well, go to Wiki. It's easy. You're a doctor of chiropractic. You can figure out simple things like that. Right. So a guru, Ogura, he does some of the metabolic research that I talk about as well.
What is that?
Ogura. And so some of the studies looking at metabolic function do that. And there's some new research coming out on immediate early genes. And I can give you some articles as a place to start. There's tons of stuff on Facebook, different, organizations or groups that present, articles. Horvick, obviously, her Reality Check website has a ton of stuff. That's a great place to start. And then just start reading the articles. Stuff that is not condition-based. I mean, it's okay to read that.
Yeah.
It's fine. But if we want to progress this into a greater understanding of the real bench science that's happening with chiropractic, just go read the stuff.
Yeah. Do you have other like subscriptions that you use to like constantly get the research articles, or do you like? That's the process. I'm curious of like how.
So I also use like I have neuroscience subscription to some neuroscience stuff. Some of the material I present, for example, I presented the neurophysiology of vertebral subluxation a few weeks ago and talked about the theories that we talked about so far today. But then I brought in a new element looking at immediate early genes, which no studies have been done yet in humans, but they've done some really interesting work in chickens that we can and chicken spines that we can extrapolate to imagine that the same thing. I think if you get to a level where you can start to go, hey, what if that? Maybe that's my job as the neuroscientist / chiropractor to present those opportunities. But we got to remember more than 7% of what the person on the stage is saying, right? And the only way to do that is to read the stuff. Mm-hmm. Nature Alert, Neuroscience News, Science Alert, things like that, which maybe are a bit more heavy basic science oriented.
Okay.
There's a ton of chiropractic resources out there too. Dan Murphy's subscription service is great. That's, you can't go wrong there.
Right. And once you have that desire and that intention and curiosity, like you're going to find it.
Yeah.
How much time would you say in the beginning, if docs want to know, all right, how much of my day can I dedicate to like getting this process rolling to just get on the path? So
maybe it's not even a day. Maybe you decide for 3 hours a week, you have 5 friends that you Skype with and everybody brings an article and presents it. That's called a journal club. And guess what? You read one article, but with you and your 5 friends, you have 6 a week.
Right.
Maybe that's a 3-hour conversation where each of you spends 30 minutes talking about the awesome article that you read. This idea of creating, a pseudo journal club with your peers, try and choose smart people. Wow, suddenly who has time to read 6 articles a week? I bet you everybody has time to read one and then explain it to their friends. Yep.
Dr. Mo, we're coming down towards the end, and I don't even know if I followed my outline as well. We've covered so much. Something that, going back to hear your commencement, every single time I watch it just gives me the absolute chills.
Thanks.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's
one of my favorite experiences of my whole life, actually, was that 13 and a half minutes. It was... It was a pretty profound experience. And I think, like, public speaking is almost effortless for me, which is something I'm really grateful for.
Yeah.
But I think if we can push ourselves to get out there and do things like that, and if that starts with a Toastmasters club or whatever, but anytime you have the opportunity to put yourself out there with, like, real heart and authenticity, I think you can be changed as a human being.
Yeah. That room was changed. You said you may not remember what I say, but you remember how I feel. And I think a lot of people remembered both. And, going back to that integrity piece and that character piece, I think that's such a huge takeaway for our listeners. It's like, as you always say, and Dr. Mack, it's like who you are as a person will always precede who you are as a chiropractor.
Yep.
And that has stuck with me so much.
It's so true. And our biggest hurdles in life don't come from outside, they come from inside. And, that Heraclitus quote about integrity being your destiny, it's so true. When we think about core characteristics, it's like the story I started at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
No withdrawals from your integrity bank, because it makes your choices really simple. And it doesn't make it always easy. Right. But it really is the light that guides your way.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think it just has to change. You hear these stats about chiropractors, 2 out of every 3 are going to fail. It's just like, that has to change.
Yep.
We need more chiropractors in this world. Like high quality people.
Yep.
Who are chiropractors.
Yeah. So how do we create that kind of personal development in our schools, right? Because I think that's part of our responsibility. We spend all this time stuffing your brains, right, to spew out on competency exams. And it's not enough. It's not enough because we also have to develop you as human beings. And the only way that happens for a lot of people is through mentorship. Yeah. And I'd like to see that change and develop,
Yeah, that'll be like my last question, I guess, to you is the mentorship. That was something I knew we wanted to get to. It has to happen, right?
Yep.
For students. There's too much to learn in 3 years, I think,
yep.
to be ready to run a business, to be an amazing chiropractor, an amazing human being, learning to adjust, learning to communicate. It's like,
yep.
There's so much.
And we need to have more people step up and be mentors. And mentors can come in all different shapes and sizes. And I have a lot of students coming to me to seek mentorship. And quite honestly, I'm really starting to get tapped out. And so now I'm asking students if they would be willing to work with me in small groups because I don't have time for all of this individual one-on-one stuff. And but we need to give back. So practicing chiropractors out there, we need to give service back, which really involves helping grow people as human beings, not just, hey, here's my business plan or this is a great marketing strategy, but how do I help you become the best possible human that you can be, right? Yeah. In order to do that, though, you have to done the work yourself, too.
Right.
That's the harder part.
For docs who are and students who are getting ready to go out there and in desperate need of mentorship, what's your biggest piece of advice for them on how to find somebody who is congruent and integrity and who's done the work? Like,
yeah,
that's hard to know.
I think there's a trial and error process to that, but okay. I think, just like we want to have in our practice, word of mouth referrals, you talk to people, you ask for suggestions, you connect with different docs. Lots of docs will offer free stuff to students for you to go and try, and that's something that my wife and I did. I mean, we went and talked to anybody that ever came to campus. We went to all the stuff, right? Yeah. And our students really focus on technique seminars, but you need to start to go and listen to people to just get a sense. In addition to that, you need to be doing the personal work to help yourself evolve. Mm-hmm. And that's actually the hard work, I think.
Definitely.
As I move through this process, I'm more and more inclined to develop a more formal mentoring process outside of my work here at the college. And so that's something that I'm working on that perhaps will come to fruition in the next year. Yeah.
I love that.
Yep.
And then one of our quickfire questions that I've always loved when I listen to other podcasts is just the books and the resources. You've dropped a couple already, but are there any other books that are just like the most often gifted for you or that just have influenced you in a profound way?
Right now I'm reading Norman Doidge's The Brain's Way of Healing, which I think is really in alignment with our philosophy. And if you haven't read it, it's available in audio as well. I mean, I love audiobooks because I don't read that well, actually. So Norman Doidge's The Brain's Way of Healing is phenomenal, and it really talks about the body's ability to heal itself. So, I mean, those are some pretty powerful stories to be able to share. Pema Chodron, who's a Tibetan Buddhist nun, I think, I bet you I've given away 100 of her books and lots of audio stuff for her as well. But she makes Buddhism and meditation and that idea of living an enlightened, conscious path extremely accessible, She makes it not scary, and I think that's a really valuable resource. Most people are kind of afraid of the whole meditation thing, but she's my absolute favorite. So that's a couple of things I got on the go right now.
Perfect. And then, and you do listen to podcasts, or I remember you sharing another audio series that you really loved, and it might have been Pema Chodron. So
probably. She has a great CD series.
Okay.
That's called Getting Unstuck.
Cool.
Which saved my life once or twice.
I'll definitely have that in the show notes for our listeners and then on our webpage.
Dr. Mo, I just want to acknowledge you and thank you so much for the time that you've given here, but then just the work that you're doing for the chiropractic profession. It is inspiring to know the amount of lives that you're impacting, and coming from practice to to go back and teach. It's like, that takes a special person, knowing that I know how successful you and Dr. Tamara McIntyre, who I want to give a shout out to, who's also been amazing and influential in my learning process. And I think the biggest takeaway is just like, you both are so passionate about what you do, and knowing the responsibility that you guys have to like give everything that you've got is like inspiring to me to know that I'm going to do that now. Like, all the students who see it done, it's like you're shining the light for them and the path for them. So thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. I think we have so much gratitude for people like you in my life and for opportunities like this. And, if I try to take no credit and no blame, right? But I get that you can inspire greatness in other people. And I think that's part of what my responsibility is. And I have a lot of gratitude for being able to do that. And I really appreciate this opportunity to do this today. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Hopefully we can do a round 2.
I'd love to.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thanks.
I'm back. I hope you all enjoyed that interview as much as I did. But in the heat of the moment, I forgot to ask her where our listeners can reach out to her. But the best way to do so is through Facebook, and send her a message, connect with her, follow her. And in the near future, she's going to be putting together some groups and doing some different things that are really, really exciting. So if you connected with her, resonated with her, and you want to continue to follow her, start on Facebook. And then from there, she'll be able to connect you to some future things that she's going to be doing. And that's all I have for you. So thank you for listening, and until next time, peace. All right, TAC listeners, if you enjoy this one, head over to iTunes or Stitcher so you can subscribe to the podcast and get an automatic download of our newest episode each and every week. While you're at it, we would love a review, a comment, a rating, anything that will allow us to reach more docs and more students and continue to raise the bar in chiropractic performance training. If you haven't yet checked out the artfulchiropractor.com, you can do that for show notes for this episode and previous ones, along with any of the resources that our docs are dropping. And if you haven't yet checked out the Kairos Training Culture Community Facebook page, you have to get there, send a request with a message of who you are and why you want to be a part of the group, because there are so many amazing golden nuggets that are being dropped every single day that are elevating the chiropractic performance game. So with that, I hope you all have an amazing rest of your week as always, and until next time, peace.